Look, it's a great pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank you and the Graham Centre for having me. I think the Graham Centre is a really good representation of just how fundamental research and development is for Australia's sheepmeat industry. You know, as being a lawyer, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a numbers man. You know, what I'm here today is to talk about the role that we play, the Sheepmeat Council of Australia, and also to talk about these documents. At morning tea and lunch, you'll be able to pick up a copy in the room next door. But what this is a Sheep Industry Strategic Plan. And this is a blueprint for the industry leading up to 2030. It's for the plans for 2015 to 2020, but it's our blueprint for the industry leading to 2030. There's also a short brochure here. Now, this is a pretty important document, and I'll step through why. But it's the first time that, so I'll step back a little bit. The Sheepmeat Council has 4 fundamental functions. The first being policy development, the second being advocacy for your industry, the third being developing strategy for your industry, and the fourth being industry management. So can I just do a on-the-spot poll of who has heard of the Sheepmeat Council within the room here? Are you familiar with what we do? Very good. What about Meat and Livestock Australia? Animal Health Australia? And the National Residue Survey? Okay, so I'm glad. I'm very pleased that you are familiar with what we do, but I want to just talk about it a little bit in depth because I'll jump to this slide. Now this is affectionately known as the spaghetti diagram. And what's in place in the red meat industry is a memorandum of understanding. All these organisations are signatories to that memorandum of understanding. But fundamentally what it sets out is the roles and responsibilities of each organisation within the industry. And what our role is, as I stepped out those 4 functions, advocacy, but also oversighting your levy expenditure. We have oversight over MLA, the industry service companies, being MLA, Animal Health Australia and the National Residue Survey. This is a similar role to what the Cattle Council has, Australian Lot Feeders Association, Australian Meat Industry Council, Goat Industry Council, you name it, they're there. So it's a pretty important role, as you can imagine. However, I just want to set the landscape a little bit for R&D, because while we have this fundamental responsibility to oversight your levy expenditure, what we're actually seeing within the R&D portfolio in the red meat industries is a changing of the dynamics of how investment works. So traditionally with R&D investment, you know, your levy, there's a system set up with the Australian government where they will match levy dollars invested into R&D dollar for dollar. So it's matching funding from the Australian government. So traditionally it was probably a 50-50 split. But there's also a component that is from private investment and other funders, such as universities or companies that have R&D portfolios that want to contribute to the industry. And MLA actually has a really unique system set up called the MLA Donor Company. And what this is essentially a tool to leverage that private investment. So Charles Sturt University wants to invest in a project. They can invest through that MLA Donor Company and get that funding matched dollar for dollar, which is a great system because what we're actually seeing, you know, in the landscape of state governments pulling away from investment in R&D and reduced funding across the board, this is a great tool for private investment to actually invest in the industry. And I think it works quite well. But what we're seeing is if you look at the landscape of what the portfolio looks like, what you're seeing is a third of levy investment, a third government funding, and a third of that private investment. So this traditional mentality that, you know, we as a peak council oversight levy expenditure, well, it's a changing dynamic for us now because essentially, if you take that traditional view, we're only oversighting a third of R&D expenditure. That's within our bailiwick. However, this is where this document comes into play, because what it does is set the strategic priorities. So the red meat industry has such a complex structure that even I battle with it sometimes. However, within that memorandum of understanding I was talking about before, there is a responsibility for the industry to set these strategic plans every 5 years. And so there is an overarching plan called the Meat Industry Strategic Plan, which all of these bodies have put into. And so that was released last year, and it sets out the priorities for the whole red meat sector. And then underneath that, you've got our strategic plans plugging into it. And what we're seeing is, I'm sure some of you a few weeks ago saw MLA release their annual investment plan and their strategic plan. What they've done is actually aligned to these strategic plans. So you have this set line of priorities for the industry. So while, you know, the dynamics of that investment has changed, we have such an important responsibility in setting that strategic priority, because that is what drives that investment. So this is a really key document for the industry going forward. Just a little bit about me. As mentioned, I came across from the beef industry. Sheep's been something I've been learning about. I'm actually acting in this role for 12 months. The substantive CEO's on maternity leave for 12 months. And I came across from the beef industry, grew up in North Queensland, a town called Charters Towers. And I didn't really know what a sheep was, to be honest. There was a few sheep up there. So it's been such a steep learning curve. But when I came across, I thought, what a fantastic industry. I mean, the actual estimate off-farm value of the sheep meat industry is $5 billion. And the gross value of production, according to ABARES, is around $3.2 billion. So that's a fair whack of an industry. But then when you think, well, there's all this exciting R&D happening as well, I mean, that doesn't take into account the significant advancements that can come in the future around eating quality, genetic improvement, on-farm efficiencies. I mean, it's tremendous. And then to take trade into account as well, this industry has such a positive outlook that it's an absolute pleasure to be working for it. And I just hope you're aware of that. However, R&D underpins that. And I want to also pass on a message in terms of the current political climate that we're about to enter into. I mean, it's looking like the coalition will form a majority government, but if not, we might have a hung parliament. And in that scenario, what happens is a bit of horse trading. And so there are a lot of people on the fringes and parties on the fringes that question the livestock industries and our practices. We know that they're sound, and we invest in R&D to ensure that they're sound. However, I just want to bring the message to you that R&D is so fundamental as well, because what it actually does is gives us the evidence to say that we have sound practices in our industry, and it's going to be such a fundamental tool for us as advocates in Canberra for you going forward. So I'll step through now what the Sheep Industry Strategic Plan outlines. There's 11 themes to the strategic plan. The first one here is the wellbeing of animals in our care. Now, what this one actually covers, this incorporates biosecurity, on-farm biosecurity, our disease response mechanisms, and also R&D into husbandry practices to make sure what we're doing with our animals is appropriate. The second theme is stewardship of environmental resources. So this is where pest management comes into play. Weeds, wild dogs is such an important issue at the moment. How we offset our carbon emissions, all those sort of things, and opportunities for producers under those schemes. Now this is a really pivotal one. Red meat in a nutritious and healthy diet. I'm sure we all saw the World Health Organisation report that came out last year that was a little bit damning of red meat in the diet. Fortunately, bacon seemed to cop the majority of the criticism. But, the fact that there's this perception that red meat is akin to tobacco or alcohol in terms of your health, I mean, it's just not right. And so this is going to be a really important strategic point for us, where we can actually say, you can eat red meat as part of a balanced diet and, you know, you're not going to have any adverse effects. So this is an area that we really need to focus on going forward, because it all comes down to what the consumer perception is, and that's what actually drives our markets and our industry. Efficiency and value in trade and market access. Mike McCormick mentioned the free trade agreements that have been agreed by the coalition government in their previous term. We were very fortunate as an industry to have the China Free Trade Agreement, the Japan, the TPP, all those agreements sealed and delivered during that period. Because what market access does is actually drive our industry. We're an export-dominated industry. Off the top of my head, around 50% of lamb is exported in Australia and up to 80-90% of mutton. So we are very dependent on these export markets. And for what it's worth, I had a very fortunate experience at the start of the year to travel to the United States to meet with our equivalent organisation there called the American Sheep Industry Association. Now, the American market is quite a good example of how market access really defines and drives our industry. In America at the moment, the split, or in the previous year, the split between product, you had about 20% of New Zealand product going in there being consumed by Americans. You had around 30% being, sorry, it's a little bit higher than that, a little bit, 40% of American product being consumed, that's the domestic product, and around 40% of Australian product being consumed. But what's actually predicted to happen this year is Australian product's going to overtake the American domestic consumed product. So that's quite amazing. There's going to be more Australian lamb consumed in America than American lamb. So it's a tremendous compliment to our industry that we've gained that market access. But it just highlights the importance of this market access. And I might add, when I was talking about the value of the industries before, there's a lot of opportunity coming in market access. I mean, although Brexit's probably thrown a bit of a spanner in the works, you know, there were steps towards an EU free trade agreement happening, and that's still occurring. Now, with the British exit from the EU, I mean, they're a substantial consumer of Australian lamb through the EU market, so there's a great opportunity there as well. And the other area that we see a lot of potential is with India. The Indian Free Trade Agreement is going to be so important for the Australian industry. And then on top of that, you know, there's been talk for a few years about a Gulf Cooperative States Free Trade Agreement, so a free trade agreement with the Middle East essentially. And they're a huge consumer of both live animals and the box trade. So, you know, imagine if those things get over the line as well. I mean, the potential demand for the industry is huge. Just excuse me too, I am recovering from a bit of a head cold, so if I do sound a little bleary-eyed, I apologise. Marketing and promotion of sheep meat and livestock. Now, I'm sure all of you saw the ads at the start of the year, the lamb ad, you know, the Operation Boomerang, where Operation Boomerang was to bring expatriates home to eat lamb on Australia Day. Just last week, that ad won the Mumbrella Award, which is the advertising community's Academy Awards, I suppose, in Australia, and that won Best Ad for the year. It has been a campaign that has been running successfully for so many years, and it's such a compliment to our industry that lamb is now so strongly associated with Australia Day. And that's down to marketing and promotion. However, stepping back to that previous theme I was talking about, where, you know, we have to be so mindful of the consumer sentiment surrounding consumption of lamb, you know, it's not something we should take as a given. We have to be mindful of what the consumer's looking for, and we have to be mindful of what we can do to bring our product to the consumer. Optimising product quality and cost efficiency. So what this theme is about is driving efficiency on farm, and this is probably the key area where R&D can play such a pivotal role. I mean, at the moment, it says there 35% of sheep and lambs are sold over the hooks, and you're paid on a quality and lean meat yield basis. So what we want to be able to do is actually get producers to get feedback on the product they supply, so that when you sell your animals to processors, you actually understand that you're optimising the specs that they are after, and they're basing theirs on what the consumer wants. So by having that feedback, you're actually able to ensure your production systems are optimised to meet that demand. And in doing so, you can do it in the most efficient manner possible. So that's what that theme's all about. Now, around the world, we are renowned for having such a safe and assured product. And most of that is down to the fact we have such robust industry integrity systems in place. Every time you tag your animal, excuse me, sorry about that. Every time you tag your animal, every time you fill out an MVD form, that is putting into the framework of Australia's traceability system and the integrity of our product that we market both to our domestic consumers and our international consumers. It is when I was talking earlier about the fact we undertake industry management, Sheepmeat Council sits on a number of committees. We also sit on the Safe Meat Partnership, which is essentially a partnership between government, industry, and state governments as well. And what that group is charged with doing is actually ensuring those integrity systems remain robust and in place. Now, we have a responsibility to make sure that those systems continue to improve. It is quite a politically sensitive area. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around whether the sheep industry should go to an electronic identification system similar to the cattle. We do not advocate that position at all. We feel we have a robust traceability system based on the current mob-based system. However, there's nothing stopping us from seeing if we can't improve it. Imagine, a few years down the track, if you actually could get an electronic tag that had an appropriate cost that was proportional to the animal. Wouldn't that be a great position for our industry to be in? However, that's not to say the current system doesn't work, but we have to invest in it, and that's our responsibility to do that. So that's what that theme's about. Excuse me. So this is about, similar to the previous, I think it was theme 6, this is about driving that efficiency on farm and seeing if we can't finish animals in a more efficient manner, more quickly. Is there scope to move towards more intensive production systems? I'm not sure. Thank you. But there's a tremendous opportunity for our industry there to actually drive down those costs on farm and make sure that we are boosting production, given that demand that I was talking about before is anticipated to increase. I do apologise, I'm sorry. Now this is a really interesting area, processing productivity. I'm sure of issues around the competition and competitive point for producers. Are they getting a fair stake within the supply chain around sale yards, what they're being paid by the processor? What we want is a transparent processing sector, and how you can do that is by garnering that feedback I was talking about before, but also ensuring that the processing sector is as efficient as possible. And there are significant dollars spent on driving that efficiency within the processing sector. In February this year, Sheepmeat Council had its board meeting in Bordertown in South Australia, and we were fortunate enough to be hosted by JBS to go have a look at their plant there, and they've actually implemented these robotics. And it is such an amazing tool that they've got there. Essentially, the carcass comes into this robot, and in the space of about a minute, 2 minutes, the whole carcass is broken down, and then it's just packaged. So it's taken a huge amount out of the costs on the line, which has driven down the costs of the processing, which again can actually drive the returns to producers. So, it's important that, the other thing I should mention is that there are numerous reports pointing out that Australia's processing sector is the most expensive in the world. A lot of it attributable to labour costs, but there are also a large number of other factors such as distance and transport costs and all those sort of things. However, and it is also Australia's largest manufacturing industry. So it is important that if we as producers are driving down our costs of production and making sure we can do it as efficiently as possible, that doesn't hit a roadblock at the end of the supply chain. That we have to ensure that that is as efficient and well run as possible. The other thing that we're looking at as a Sheep Meat Council is the current language that's used around the sheep meat industry. There's an AusMeat language, which is essentially the industry endorsed and codified language that is used for cuts of meat. Excuse me. The language also applies in the beef industry, and they've just gone through a review to see if it can be the most reflective and dynamic language possible, because what's happened over time is science into eating quality and the quality of cuts has just advanced so much that we need to ensure that the language moves along with it. And at the moment you've seen these advancements, but perhaps the language hasn't moved. One of the things we'd like to see in the future is an actual cuts-based system for lamb and sheep meat, whereby you actually get paid on the quality of that cut. And what science is showing is, there are a number of factors, and certain cuts within an animal can still be high quality even though other cuts may not be. So if we can actually get there, that's tremendous. And MSA is going to play a big role in that as well. And before, when I alluded to the fact that we've got significant advancement in making eating quality, if you compared us to the beef industry is actually leaps and bounds ahead of us in eating quality at the moment. Last figure I saw, and I'm happy to stand corrected, but up to a third of the kill in the beef industry is actually MSA graded now, which is astounding. So you've got 1/3 of the product being graded on its eating quality. If we could get to a similar point within the sheep industry and advance our understanding of how a product eats, what the consumer wants, what satisfies the consumer, and actually garner the premiums that can come with that, I think the industry stands to be in a really strong position. Now, we are staunch supporters of the live export industry. It is such an integral part of our industry. What many people don't understand is that many of the markets, Middle East being a prime example, where we sell our live animals, a box trade follows. They complement each other. One doesn't come without the other. In addition to that, the fact that you have the ability to create competition for those animals is good for producers as well, because what you get is a drive up of prices. Demand from the live industry, demand from processors, that's good for producers. Now, we have challenges in the live export industry. I'm sure you all saw a couple of weeks the controversy that arose in the beef industry with live cattle exports to Vietnam. Now, what we need to do going forward, after the Indonesia fiasco, we got given a system called SCAS, which is the Export Supply Chain Assurance System. And essentially what that said is that animals need to be traced all the way into market. And animals can only be processed at approved facilities there. So Australian exporters have to have sight of the animal all the way to the point of the consumer in that market. And the export industry has actually taken that on, and they've built it and they've driven it because they see that actually gives them their social licence to operate. That's what they need to do to justify to the Australian community that they are actually good stewards of their industry. Now, what's actually going to happen in the future is the export industry is transitioning out of SCAS to an industry-run assurance program that will be aligned with global standards and global assurance programs. And what they want to do is actually be the world standard for live animal exports, so that we can say, already we can say we're the best in the world at it, but what we can say is, here's our system why don't you use it? Just as an anecdotal comment about why that's important in the context that we operate in within Australia. During my cattle council days, I had the fortunate experience of dealing with some American counterparts, and they actually have quite a substantial live export industry in the US. In terms of numbers, if you compared it relatively to Australia, it'd be up there. Some of the mortality rates that happen on those ships are above 10% in the US, which is appalling. But why does it go unnoticed? Because it's not on the social conscience of the American community. What we have in Australia is an industry that's on the social conscience of the Australian community. So we have to endeavour and take as many steps as possible to give that assurance that we are doing the right thing by our animals and we are doing the right thing by the industry. Hence why investment in this area is so important. And this is the final theme, and I think this is probably the most pivotal for Sheepmeat Council at the moment. In partnership, I'll take a step back. I'm sure you've all seen discussions around producer representation in Australia at the moment. You've got the National Farmers Federation going through a process called Streamline and Strengthen, where they're examining how best can they be the representative organisation for Australia's agricultural industry. And in line with that, other industry bodies like Sheepmeat Council, Cattle Council, we're all examining how can we be the most representative organisation for producers. Because at the end of the day, the model we have at the moment is not going to be sustainable forever. So we have to adjust and we have to evolve. And one of the ways we've identified doing that is by building capability within the industry and building leadership and actually bringing skills to producers so that they can advocate for their industry. Under this project, we're going to put 15 people through the Australian Institute of Company Directors course. This is a tremendous course. I was lucky enough to do it at the start of the year. And what it teaches you is the principles of governance, which is important for your own businesses as you establish your own corporate structures. But it's also important for an industry whereby we actually have appropriate governance structures in place for our representative bodies and responsible directors and strong advocates for the industry. We're also going to put, I think it's 10 people through the Australian Rural Leadership Program, which again is to equip people that want to be leaders in the industry with the skills so they can. If you look at the state farming organisations at the moment, it's pretty well known fact memberships are declining. Part of the reason for that is it's tough for young leaders to break through. They're very established places. So if we can actually equip young people with the skills so they can actually have the confidence to step up and actually take that stewardship going forward, that's going to be so important for the industry going forward. In addition, we're having an industry ambassador program whereby up-and-coming producers or future champions of the industry get the opportunity to travel to the US and New Zealand and interact with their counterparts over there so that we can all learn from each other. So it's such an important project for Sheepmeat Council. It's really going to define what we look like in the future. And it also, by building that capability and capacity for the industry, you're actually increasing the pool of people that want to take the industry forward and drive change, reform and advocacy. So that's the end of the SISP themes. I'm not sure how much time I've got.
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. But look, I'd implore you to take a great interest in what your advocacy bodies do for you. We are very open. I should just explain a little bit about the transition process that we're going through at the moment. I mentioned before we're examining how can we be the most efficient and representative body for you, our levy payers, our members, the people we represent. And so if we can do anything for you, I encourage you to contact us because that's what we're there to do. And unless we actually understand your wants and needs, we cannot effectively advocate for you. So become involved with your industry. Join your local state farming organisation if you have an opportunity. If not, be engaged in the processes that industry service bodies like MLA put forward and the programs that they do, because they are just so important to driving our industry forward. I'd also encourage you to collect and have a read of this plan and provide us with any feedback or opportunities that you see may be arising out of it. I think you'll actually enjoy the read, and I think you'll actually see from the document just how much potential and the opportunity that we have for the industry and the steps that we're taking. We're in a good place now, but we can be in a fantastic place in the future. So I welcome any questions, and I thank you for your time.